I've been thinking about climbing the seven summits since 2019, and then suddenly the opportunity to climb Mount Kilimanjaro was there. It wasn't planned like I thought it would be, but I had to say yes. It was short notice. It was only about 6 weeks, and I was forced to ask myself, was I really prepared for the mountain, or did I just really want it? Kilimanjaro to me had always felt like the logical starting point for the seven summits, and not because it was easy, but to me it was the one that was the test that would tell me, am I actually ready to take on some of the other summits that are a lot more difficult? Some of my friends decided they were going to Africa and going to do Kilimanjaro, and they invited me. And though I didn't feel 100% prepared, I had been doing a lot of training in the summer leading up to it. So I really just felt like I couldn't turn down that opportunity. I immediately said yes, committed pretty much all the savings that I had, and went all in on the mountain so that I could get a taste of what the seven summits would actually be about. And after all that build up since 2019, I would get to actually finally test myself and see if this is everything I wanted it to be. I don't know, I feel like these short notice, spur of the moment type hikes and trips are romanticized a lot. A lot of the times, like if it's in a smaller mountain setting, it's fine. You're gonna go out, you're gonna have a good time. But there's a different feeling and a different, like, it's more complicated once you get into higher altitude stuff, bigger mountain stuff. The risks get higher, and you have to start to think like, am I actually prepared enough to go do this short-term notice? So where I feel like the short-term notice does work out, worked for me because that summer I'd been leading up to it. I'd been doing a lot of training. I didn't know what I wanted to do near the end of summer, but I built up a really big training base for that year and obviously prior years. So that's where I feel like short notice can work, is like you have to have that fitness base. You have to have lots of experience already in the mountains. And then it's like just the planning and logistics needs to be a little bit shorter notice. That can work. Where you can run into trouble and there's a lot more risk is when you start getting into the stuff where it's like, well, you don't actually have the base, you don't have the experience. Because mountains don't really care about your excitement and your motivation for it. They care about how prepared are you, and you never necessarily know exactly what's going to happen. My training has never been super flashy, fancy training. Like, it's just basic stuff repeated over and over. I wasn't trying to win over Kilimanjaro with fancy exercises that I was doing. I wanted to arrive there healthy with a big aerobic base. And I knew that just having strength wasn't going to do it. You also had to be prepared for that altitude, because that's where everything would get exposed. Kilimanjaro isn't a super technical mountain, but it's just that steady grinding away on you day in and day out. I did it over 8 days, and the altitude starts to build up. You're not getting great sleeps. You start to feel the fatigue of that. Oftentimes, you're not eating as well as maybe what you would at home, and you have to manage things like poor quality water, which we ran into some issues there, and the digestive stress that comes along with that. So your body's starting to wear away. So it really becomes more about just enduring through that period of time and pacing yourselves. Like on Kilimanjaro, the locals, the porters, the guides, they always say pole, pole, and it means slowly, slowly. And that's really actually a very important tip. Luckily for me, once I actually got out onto the trail, what I realized was I had more than enough fitness to do the hike itself. And the altitude I did really, really well with, having a good plan going into that, doing some training that you can around your breath ahead of time, managing DIMOX, knowing what the symptoms are, all of that stuff helped me a ton. So it was actually ended up being less of a challenge than what I thought it would be physically, but then what it ended up being was more that mental side, figuring out like, hey, this is the first time I'm doing one of the seven summits. I had that as my focus for so long. Was it going to actually live up to everything I wanted it to be? And I wanted a certain amount of challenge, that fine tipping point between not challenging enough that it doesn't push you and make you question it and do hard things, but also not so much that you fail, right? You want to be just on that edge of difficulty. And honestly, for the most part, I was finding that I was below that, and mentally that was difficult for me until that summit night, when that all just vanished for me. It was we got snow. We were hiking in the dark for a long time, and then the sun started to break, and it was just this beautiful sunset, clouds, snow. I was with my friends. We were just coming up to Stella Point, and it just like nothing else mattered. It blew everything away, and I realized like, yes, this is exactly what I want. I want to chase down more of this. You get to Stella Point, you don't have that much more of a climb left. You're kind of just a flatter to the top, and I guess that's the like elephant in the room is like altitude. That's what everyone worries about on Kilimanjaro, and some of the people that I went with, they did struggle with it. I watched others struggle with it. I luckily did really well, and what I think it comes down to is have that big cardiovascular base. Don't race up the mountain. Take the longer route. Understanding what altitude sickness feels like and what those symptoms are. Having Dymox, having an O2 sat monitor, and knowing where you're actually standing and where you're at so that you can manage it properly. I'll break that down in a whole separate video where we'll just talk about altitude and the training that you can do ahead of time for that, and then really what are the symptoms you need to be watching out for and how do you manage that. We'll talk about that in another one. That's a whole nother ball game. But like what the mountain really taught me is how much your preparation matters, whether that's your physical preparation, your planning as far as like, hey, what route are you going to take that's going to give you a higher chance of summiting? What are you going to bring as far as food, hydration, gear, all of that stuff? It really comes down to like all these compounding little decisions make up your bigger picture of are you going to be successful on Kilimanjaro? So luckily for me, Kilimanjaro was a massive success. I am still looking for that next bigger challenge. I want to take my body closer to where it is really, really challenged, which for some people will be Kilimanjaro. I'll break down everything in another video around training and planning and managing altitude, all of that stuff, even the mental side of it and everything that you go through. But all I can say after doing it is that I came down and I immediately was like, I love high altitude climbing and the feeling that you get when you're above the clouds. And there's that extra little piece in there that you have to consider when you're talking about like, hey, there's just less oxygen available. Every little thing that I do matters that much more. So if you guys are thinking about climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and you have questions, drop them into the comment section. I read them all myself and will answer all of those questions for you guys in the comments. And I will be getting some other ones out that talk specifically about training for it in preparation and altitude. If you guys enjoyed this video, I would love it if you can hit the little like button and subscribe so that you can get the rest of the breakdown on Mount Kilimanjaro.